Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Wicked Parley. I'm your co-host, Jess, and this is your host, Justin. One of these days, I'm going to do that differently.
Yeah, maybe. First things first, before we get started with the episode, I just kind of want to point out a couple things. The first thing I want to say is that last Saturday, I want to apologize for the type of content that we produced. It was nobody's fault other than mine. I'm not a lot of people know this or not, but I've actually been kind of experiencing some back pain, and I had a back issue at the middle of our episode on Saturday, and I got a little distracted, and I just kind of want to apologize. I hope that doesn't happen in the episode or any of the episodes coming up. Also,
Probably didn't help that I was spazzing behind camera.
that's okay. Don't worry about it.
Manya. Okay.
And
Oh, there went the sound.
and also, I want to kind of throw it out there, but on Sunday we're going to be doing our first Twitch live stream. So hopefully, if you guys want to check us play some games, you'll be able to come check us out. And it's gonna be fun.
Hopefully it's not a total house fire.
Yeah, hopefully it's not a house fire. It won't be. I mean, it better not be, Rose. Better not be.
I'm not gonna try it.
You
We
better
still have to
not burn
determine.
anything down.
I'm not gonna be in the kitchen. It's gonna be fine.
Okay, wait a minute. What? Okay, anyway. And also, on to other things. An update when it comes to the challenge. So, if any of you guys missed the episode, the challenge was going to bed on time, which means about 11:30 at night, for 7 to 8 hours. We started this on July 3rd, and I gotta say, fireworks definitely have affected that particular thing in a way that I had, not foreseen. I also find that it's extremely challenging to stay asleep. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but that probably is the worst challenge on the entire wheel for me personally. Like, I absolutely don't sleep. I sleep like 3 hours normally, and I'm very happy with my 3 hours. I feel like I'm less productive, and I feel like when I wake up, I just want to go run, like out of my apartment. And and in fact, I do sometimes, just to burn off the energy. So, I'm gonna say it's been horrible in a personal health. So, I mean, Rose, what about you? What is the result of this challenge been so far?
For me, it's been about the same. The thing is, the hard part is not being able to hang out with my night owl friends because they're regularly staying up past the time that I usually go to bed anyway, which was originally midnight.
Mm-hmm.
So, according to my usual schedule, 11:30 is not too different from midnight. I'm perfectly fine with that. It's I can't interact with my friends because they're always on later than I am. And now I just can't talk with them, and there's a group of friends I haven't talked to in like a week already.
Oh my god.
So it's just like, I just want to talk to my night owl friends, and I can't!
Your poor night owl friends. Like, maybe they can check out the Twitch live stream on Sunday.
Maybe.
Maybe. Okay.
Anyway.
So what's the topic we're going to be getting into today?
We are discussing hypnotism.
Oh my god, hypnotism. I mean,
Ba-ba-da-da,
there are some
ooh.
strong opinions by some people, I'm sure, in the comments section, there's going to be people who are going to want to say something. And I also want this to kind of be pointed out there. Each of the sections, we're going to allot at the very end 2 minutes to respond to any questions or comments or statements. So please feel free to send in a message or a comment or a question regarding anything we talk about, and know that we will address it during that particular point.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I do read them while in the middle of Justin's explanations, though, so I will read all the comments. So,
sounds like a plan. Looks like Rose is going to be on top of it, so don't you guys all
I am
worry.
on comment duty! Hello to everybody in the chat, in the future chat.
Yeah. All right, then. Let's get started, then.
Alright, first thing is first, not last. What is hypnotism? Or what is hypnosis?
All right. I'm going to play a little bit fast and loose with the definition here, because as any person who's ever studied hypnotism or hypnosis, it's a really suggestible sort of not clear-cut definition. I think the best way to say it is that it's a person who is highly suggestible and is in a state of meditative consciousness. So like they're awake, but they're almost like sleeping, and they're on this verge of almost subconscious thought, and that they are highly reactionary to like the ideas that are planted in a person's mind, and then they may or may not react to those particular ideas.
Okay. So, hypnotic suggestion, highly open to suggestion and opinion. Like, if you had to give it a sort of state, what would you consider it as? Like, is it more conscious, subconscious, unconscious? What is it?
Well, I would say that it's probably more like a meditative state of mind. You know, you're probably, if you're going to think about it from like a pseudo-Freudian perspective, then you would think about it as the state between the conscious and the subconscious, so the preconscious mind is probably where you're probably looking at if you're thinking about it in that kind of perspective. But I think that more likely than not, the easiest one to identify with is that if you've ever gone to bed and you were like very awake, but you're forcing yourself to go to sleep, and you go to that point where you can feel yourself maybe kind of like falling asleep, and you might even do like a flail or a kick or something like that, and you're aware that you did that, but you also are going to sleep, and then you're out. It's probably somewhere in that particular realm.
Okay. Yeah, that paints a very solid picture in my mind. Awesome. A very solid definition for me and hopefully everybody here to work with for the rest of the episode. I've kicked way too many people because of that. Alright, now there's a bit of a difference between hypnotism for therapy and hypnotism for entertainment. And there's even different approaches from what you've told me for hypnotherapy. Like, I thought there was only just one. You've told me there are a couple.
Yeah, there's a few out there.
Yeah. So really quickly, since we're going to cover the types in more detail later, what are the different approaches and types of hypnotism?
All right. Well, there's the classic hypnotherapy that I think a lot of people in media are likely to be aware of. There is the idea of cognitive behavioral hypnosis. There's Ericksonian or neo-Ericksonian hypnosis, which is a form of hypnotism that utilizes behaviors to kind of tackle issues. It's very interesting. It is a lot of similarities to psychotherapy, so that could be kind of fun to talk about. There's also entertainment hypnosis, as mentioned before. And then there's several other ideas surrounding hypnotism that are sometimes dabbled in certain therapies, but it's kind of on the fringes.
So, like, that's probably, once we get more detail, we could probably cover it later?
Yeah, as we get through the episode, we'll cover these all in a little bit more detail.
Okay. Alright, so yay, more to talk about later. Woot woot! Alright, so before we go into details, I kind of want to know, what can cause a person to be more susceptible to being hypnotized? Like, are there certain human aspects and behavior that make it harder to be hypnotized, or make it easier to be hypnotized? Or is that just, like, up in the air?
Well, I think it's... the simple answer is yes. The complicated answer is sort of. It's a highly speculative idea. It is something that science suggests is that there's nothing concrete pointing to it. But there are some pretty well-known theories out there that suggest that perhaps there is something to it. One of the big things that it has to do with suggestion, which is linked to hypnotism, is lived experience. A person's lived experience is going to dictate how susceptible they are to certain suggestions. An example of this is a person who perhaps survives a car crash. If they're on a stage show and they're told about a car crash, well, their lived experience is going to challenge the fake scenario, and so it might break them out of the hypnotic suggestion. There's also this notion of left and right brain thinkers. This idea that a left brain thinker is going to approach situations more logically, and so they're going to be less likely to be hypnotized. And then there's also the notion of right brain thinkers being more emotional and more susceptible to hypnotism. So there are some ideas about it, but that's pretty much what I'm willing to talk about right now.
Okay. Yeah, I can see why it's a bit hard to find any concrete evidence. You can kind of see exceptions in hypnotist shows like all the darn time.
Oh yeah.
Like if you've been to a hypnotist show and you've got a group of friends with you going there. Some of them are going to try to be hypnotized. It's just an entertainment thing. But I've seen some of the most logical people I know being easily hypnotized, and some of the more emotional people I know just attempting to be hypnotized, and they got nothing.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting to see. Anyway, so what about things like religious beliefs, your worldview, perception of self, and even trauma, like you've mentioned before with the car crash?
Mm-hmm.
How much do you think that these events kind of affect one's ability to be hypnotized?
Well, that's a bit challenging. There's a lot there to tackle. So I'm going to try and go through it one by one. And let's start off with religiousness, religious faith. I think a person's religious faith shows a lot. I think it shows a lot about how a person is going to approach the world. I think the fact that if you're a religious person, you're probably more inclined to be able to take things on faith rather than requiring material something to prove something to you, as most religions require the belief in a higher power that you never see, touch, smell, hear, sense in any way. And so I think that allows you to be a more open person, so you're more willing to speak about hypnotized. Well, be more avail yourself to hypnotic suggestion. I'll put it that way. I think lived experience plays a huge role. It does. It really, really does, as I mentioned before. And I think a huge trauma, like the car crash I mentioned, is definitely going to also affect one's ability to be hypnotized. And I definitely think that the analogy that I used about the person who survives a car crash and then is, told to imagine a car crash on a stage, they're less likely to be receptive to those types of suggestions, because they're just going to have that whole reality to contend with, and they're going to be like, this is not reality, and then it's going to break the spell, or whatever you want to call the hypnotic effect, the woo-woo effect that's going on. I think that one of the biggest things to consider also is the reality behind something. I mean, there's a lot of things that are serious, but I also think that there's a lot of silliness too. And I think it's going to be used as a benchmark, as to what is considered to be the standard for the suggestion when it comes to someone who's going to be hypnotized, whether it be for therapeutic purposes or for a stage show. And if they can build an association with it that doesn't challenge their reality, then I think it's going to allow them to be susceptible, versus someone who is going to be able to instantly go, that's not real, and then it breaks it. So.
Awesome, thank you. Because I've noticed in a bunch of the hypnotist shows I've watched that I've watched about a half a dozen so far. So not that much, but it's more than a couple of friends I know. And there's always people that break out certain points. It's usually like, I've been curious as to why, since sometimes it was with the visual and audio stimulus, but I was curious as to if there was anything deeper, which, go figure, there is.
Yeah. I mean, obviously there's going to be deeper things when it comes to that. I mean, just think about it like this, right? If you require a tactile stimulation to be able to build an association with a specific event, and that's not there, then that's already one less thing they're working with. So they have to conquer that level of disbelief in order to get there just emotionally. Forget the psychological part of it. Just think about that. It's a pretty big gap to cross.
Yeah. So we're going to cover things in a bit more detail in a bit. So shall we go ahead and take a look at the comments and see what the audience has for us?
Sure, let's take a look.
All right. Hello, Kyle. Good to see you.
Called it.
I wasn't taking that losing bet. Anyway. All right. So we got a couple of comments from Kyle. The entertainment thing is a numbers game. In a crowd of 1,000 people, ask someone to come up on stage and cluck like a chicken, and you will get a couple of volunteers. You phrase it as, who wants to come on stage and help me? And you can call that hypnotism with some smoke and mirrors.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's definitely talking about the entertainment aspect of it. And we're going to get into that particular response in a little bit later on, but just to touch on a little bit of that, you're absolutely right, it's a numbers game, but I think more than anything else than the numbers game, there's also the fact that the volunteers themselves, some of them just want to get up on stage and act like a fool. And a hypnotist who has a dull crowd will have those people join a group of people who actually could be hypnotized, and if you watch the show, you can clearly see who these people are.
This reminds me of this drunk lady.
Oh, yeah.
It was entertaining. Although I couldn't understand if she was actually hypnotized or if she was just being drunk. Anyway. So that's it for right now. Feel free to send in your comments throughout the remainder of the show. I'm happy to read them and respond where I can. I will not be speaking to anything more complex because that's something that both of us are going to answer. Alright, so thank you, Kyle, and we're going to move on to topic number 2 here.
Okay.
Bum-ba-da-dum! Different forms of and uses of hypnosis. Oh gosh. Are we sure that I'm not the drunk one here? Alright. So, anyway, earlier I ended up asking about the different types of hypnotism. Do you mind going through them in a bit more detail? I know a bit more about the hypnotism for entertainment than I do about the hypnotherapy. I mean, before we started talking about the topic, I didn't even know there were multiple forms of hypnotherapy, so.
Okay, well, yeah, there's several schools of thought when it comes to hypnosis, and there's multiple ways in which hypnotherapy has been tackled over the years. It's incredibly contingent upon both the style of the therapist as well as the time period in which the hypnosis is being conducted determines whether or not it uses certain practices, approaches, or instruments. One of the most, I would say, successful viewpoints is the Ericksonian or Neo-Ericksonian hypnotherapy. It was started by a guy named Milton H. Erickson, and it was conducted primarily, his research was mostly conducted in the 50s. And he kind of took the approach of what some therapists had been doing in the past, particularly to the psychotherapists, who were saying something to the effect of, they were asking their clients questions and things like that. Well, Milton took it a step further. He kind of was like, okay, we're going to get to know you, we're going to build up a positive repertoire with one another, and then we're going to isolate certain specific behaviors. We're going to then respond to those behaviors with a series of suggestions, and that was called, his form of hypnotherapy. Now, when I read about it and when I thought about it, I kind of was like, that's very similar to psychotherapy in a lot of ways, but it's got some big differences. I think the biggest one is the fact that when it comes to the Ericksonian thing is that his entire research was based on specific clinicians. Anyways, when it comes to the particular parts,
when it comes to particular parts?
Yeah, sorry. When it comes to particular parts, he would isolate the individual plan for the patient and then create a dialogue that was completely contingent for that particular patient, and then each patient would then be treated in its own unique way, looking at a very specific behavior. And that's pretty much the gist behind that particular form of it. Then there is cognitive behavioral hypnosis, which essentially it kind of looks at a series of different things like active imagination, expectations, appropriate attitudes, and motivation, and uses those as behavioral constants to deal with certain very specific things relating to a particular client. And so that's one way. It's similar to Ericksonian, but it's also different. And then there's a few other things as well, but we'll tackle that in a little bit.
Okay. So, So what are some of the uses of the second one, the cognitive behavioral hypnotherapy, if the first one, the Ericksonian and Neo-Ericksonian, if that one's more similar to psychotherapy? what are some of the more common uses of the cognitive behavioral hypnotherapy?
I'm not sure. Can you re-ask the question? I didn't understand what you meant.
Yeah, so you mentioned that Ericksonian and neo-Ericksonian hypnotherapy is very, very similar to psychotherapy.
Mhm.
What about cognitive behavioral hypnotherapy? Like, what is that used for? Besides, just a therapy treatment, but like, what are
Oh,
the main uses for it?
it's pretty much used to treat the same set of things. It's even considered hypnosis or hypnotherapy as well. The big difference between the two is that Erickson's ideology was that it was a plan that was built around the particular patient, and so it wasn't like a uniform thing where everyone was treated the exact same thing. It was built around a particular problem or behavior. And the other one, the cognitive behavioral hypnotherapy, was kind of like all one thing. It was like this is the exact treatment you're going to get, and this is the exact results you're going to typically try to showcase. And the thing is that both plans work pretty well, and they actually saw roughly about 70% effectiveness across the board. So that's kind of a good thing. But the big difference is that one is built around the individual, the other is just generic, open to everybody. They're gonna get the same treatment, same life.
Sounds like going to a gym class for like yoga or aerobics versus having a personal trainer.
Yeah, exactly. Personal trainer would be the Ericksonian. The I showed up at the gym, and I'm gonna do the same thing everyone else does. Is probably be best described as the CBH or cognitive behavioral hypnosis.
I can see why they both work because, of course, you've got treatments that work for a good proportion of people, but then there are some people that they just don't react the same, so they need a specialized plan. Just depends on the life experience, as you've mentioned before.
Oh yeah, life experience plays a huge role, and so what's effective is not going to be the same necessarily across the board.
Yeah, it's not going to be a one-all cure-all. We don't have those right now.
And I'm not sure we would want those.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, on the one hand, it sounds okay, but then you start thinking about it even further, and you're like, maybe not. It's like, do you really want something that treats everybody like the exact same?
Probably not.
That's an argument for later about the whole equity, equality, that thing. I've had that argument with people so many times.
Yeah.
So many times. All right. So those are the main differences in the different types of hypnotherapy. Figures that different schools of thought would probably be a factor. I mean, if you go into education, there's like 6 different schools of learning, depending on who you ask, anywhere between like 4 to 6, sometimes even 8. So there's that. But that's more of the academic, psychological types of hypnosis. What about the entertainment version? What do you have to say about that? If anything.
Well, to be honest, it's the entertainment version of it's kind of a bit of a clusterfuck. If I'm being 1,000%. Like, it is absolutely 100% like, it's all over the place. It's first, you gotta understand that hypnotism exists today not because of science, but because of tricksters and people who were trying to, con people out of money. That started in the turn of the 19th century with the stage show acts and circuses and things like that. You would have hypnotist shows and with hypnotists, taking audiences, and it was popularized in that way. And that popular thing continued into movies and things like that. And that's what eventually got scientists to start to think about those particular things, because they were faced with it all the time, and it was like a question: is there something here, or is it just, is it malarkey?
Is it nonsense?
Yeah. And so I think the biggest issues when it comes to dealing and tackling with the ideas surrounding hypnotism has to do with how much of it is real and how much of it is fake, and whether or not a person has a hypnotic effect, or if it's simply just a suggestion that is subliminally put out there. I think that if you look at commercials are a great example of advertisement using subliminal messaging and other suggestions that will make you want to purchase or buy something. I mean, just look at the way in which certain companies like McDonald's or like Little Caesars advertise.
Great, now I'm hungry, dang it.
I know, it's like, who wants a cheeseburger?
I want fries.
Oh, of course you want fries.
I like fries. They're crunchy mashed potatoes.
Oh my gosh.
I'm gonna get so much blame for that.
Oh my god.
I mean, there's something I could say, but I don't know if anybody wants to hear me say it when it comes to that. But, like, it's not involved with the episode. Forget about it.
Okay.
I'm just thinking of all the commercial jingles I know that just, like, subtly push me. As soon as I hear them, they, like, make me want to go to that store. Grocery outlet, burger market.
Oh my gosh. Like, I want chicken now. I want mashed potatoes.
So many food. And there's like a ton of other suggestions too. You don't need the theatrics. I mean, they help, but like if you want entertainment value. But if you're going for the more subtle, gosh, some of those commercials just like they influence you hard sometimes.
They can have a big influence on those certain things for sure.
Mm-hmm. Like what was it? That Subway $1 foot, $5 foot long
Oh god,
commercials.
the $5
Gosh,
foot long.
those got stuck in my head for like months.
You know what's worse is you walk into a Subway and you're like, I want my $5 foot long, and you're like, yeah, that's actually gonna be $6.75. You're like, what? It's not Tuesday? What?
Oh yeah, you don't need the theatrics. You just need something like you don't need the theatrics to be put into a suggestive state. It just happens.
For sure.
Especially if you're hungry.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, so I mean, like, there's several other examples, though, when it comes to this particular statement, though. I mean, like, childbirth, as an example, is that sometimes some people have used hypnotherapists when trying to deliver children as a way of delivering support for a woman during labor because of the traumatic experience, because of the effectiveness of having people around. I think, you know, those are ways in which some people have demonstrated treatment. I also know that some people particularly view certain forms of treatment from the lens of kicking like bad habits, you know, smoking, perhaps maybe some sort of anxiety, depression. Sometimes it's linked to bulimia is an example of some things that have gotten treatment over the years from hypnosis. But at the end of the day, it's all very maybe questionable work, and so it's important to understand that.
Is it because of like it only kind of works when you believe in it type of thing?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely one of those things where it's like, well, at least let's take a look at like bulimia, depression, one of those symptoms.
Sure.
They're all about suppressing certain behaviors, right? Or certain urges, emotions, and things like that. And the idea is that if you suppress it, it might enable people to do things they otherwise wouldn't be able to do, or be able to function more normally in society.
Kind of a mind over matter thing, which is why placebo effects kind of work.
Yeah.
And do you want to cover the whole placebo effect just for anybody who doesn't already know that?
Are you talking about the stuff that was above? Oh, yeah, I mean, like, we could talk about it, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you've, like, discovered
No, I
the
didn't
whole...
mention any of that at all.
Yeah, the whole placebo effect in general, like, just in case for those who don't know what that is.
Yeah, so obviously the placebo effect is, like, the part that says that, hey, if I say I have a particular treatment for a symptom, and then another person gets a sugar pill, the effectiveness of the treatment is equal to the sugar pill. It means that there's no real clear-cut way of seeing that this does anything beneficial for the person, and so they call that the placebo effect in general. And a lot of the treatments seem to have the same sort of correlation to them. Examples that are like this are like bulimia, for instance. There's no evidence, same thing with anxiety too, there's no evidence to suggest these treatments provide any form of a benefit outside of the same effect that you get from taking a sugar pill.
Yeah, that makes it incredibly more difficult to figure out if it's a real treatment or not.
Yeah.
Alright, with the whole suppressing certain behaviors and enabling them to do things that they otherwise wouldn't be able to do, kind of sounds like an adrenaline rush, to be quite honest, with the whole suppressing certain emotions or feelings or thoughts and kind of powering through it. Kind of like you get hurt, but you want to charge right through and you just forget about the pain until everything's over. So I suppose that's one thing that's the same between reality and fantasy when it comes to hypnosis. Well, maybe the only thing, considering how the media portrays it, huh? Like,
perhaps. I would say that, at least when it comes to the media is concerned, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hypnosis is treated incredibly poorly. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a piece of media, whether it be a TV show, a movie, a book, a song, anything, accurately portray what hypnosis actually is. That's not utter nonsense. I think most of the time they don't show actually how it affects people. I don't think they actually show how the information, I don't think they actually show the information being portrayed accurately in a way that leads to help. I think you're fed false information constantly. And so it's just all in all just a terrible medium to get your information, especially about subjects that are not fully fleshed out just yet.
Okay, yeah. That's a fair assumption to make, since the media, as we've seen in a lot of times, media likes to over-exaggerate a ton of things when it's not a straight-up report of something, and even then it can kind of be a little off based on the information that whoever's reading it, announcing it, reporting it, depending on what information they do and do not include.
Mm-hmm.
Since data can be absolutely skewed.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So, if the portrayals in media don't show how hypnosis really works, then how far does suggestion go in real scenarios?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so first things first, I think it's important to understand that this is an open debate. There's no clear-cut, this is right, this is wrong idea. It's very, very flexible, and it's not 100% well-researched and understood. So this is going to be subjective no matter how you look at it. I think also suggestion itself varies from person to person. And so explaining what one example works for one person is not going to be definitively the same for every single person who experiences this particular type of thing. So it's important that we get that kind of thing out of the way first, that way it's understood. Okay, so how does it really work? Well, most of the time, a hypnosis treatment typically follows around a couple different things, okay? First is they try to identify what the problem exactly is. You know, is this a person who experienced a trauma who is trying to work past it, trying to suppress it? Is this a person who is missing something and is looking for answers somewhere? All of these things are questions that could happen that can vary person to person. You know, a soldier who experiences, you know, trauma, perhaps PTSD, and maybe they want to forget some horrific thing that happened, or maybe they want to remember something that happened, are all things that could happen. And that's one individual, right? And the person, you know, who gets beaten as a child, perhaps suppress those things and needs to work past those things, and so how they tackle it are going to be different. They're vastly different. But they're going to start with identifying the problem. Then they're going to decide what's the best interest for the treatment for the patient, and what's the plan that's going to work the most, whether they think is going to be the most effective. And that's where the different ideologies of different forms of hypnotherapy kind of take place, because depending upon that depends upon where you go. So I definitely side more with the Ericksonian or Neo-Ericksonian ideologies when it comes to hypnotherapy, and it's probably the only hypnotherapy I would tout definitively as hypnotherapy that actually is effective. There are other forms, but I think that's the one that I personally think, okay, that makes the most sense. And that's really because of the repertoire that's built up between the two people, between the client and the clinician. And that particular thing then kind of like uses suggestions to try and move a person behaviorally in the direction that brings the most positive form of change. And so I'm going to speak about it from that particular perspective. There are examples of people utilizing certain types of thought to suppress or inhibit certain memories, certain ideas that are thought to free up or change the way in which a person perceives certain thought processes, and in that way that's also a form of hypnosis. But that is more manipulative, and I'm not so sure it's therapeutic. So it's kind of like in a gray area.
These are kind of more simplistic explanations, since I'm pretty sure if we go into the deeper ones, it's going to take a whole other episode.
It probably would, but there's also the fact that I can only really speak to about 2 or 3 different types of hypnotherapy at length. I'm aware of others, but because of some of the things that have been written about them, I didn't dive deeper. So I kind of waved it off as this is probably pseudoscience, or there's not enough data to support it, so it's not worth my attention right now. So I'm not even qualified to speak about too much of it.
Okay, fair. Considering how wild the scenario, well, considering how varied the results can be, no wonder it kind of sounds fake to quite a number of people. So, we've covered some differences between the different types of hypnotherapy, and we've even gone into a little tiny bit of detail about hypnotism for entertainment. So, what are some of the main differences and similarities between using hypnotism for entertainment versus using it for therapy?
Okay. Well, I mean, I think on one hand, hypnotherapy for entertainment is used to create a lighthearted fun, be kind of silly. And it's typically done in short durations of time. There's a lot of times people are fake, but there's also like this like idea of like a dopamine hit or like a rush for being able to go onto a stage and kind of do that. Hypnotherapy, on the other hand, is different because at first it's a little more long term. I mean, you're not going to be up there for like an hour. You're going to have a session that's going to go on for an hour, and this might happen for 8, 9, 10 weeks, or even longer in some cases. So it's going to be something that you're going to have to be a commitment to, and you're going to have to kind of be prepared for. It's not the same kind of thing. There's no entertainment factor, or at least I hope there's not an entertainment factor.
That'd be kind of messed up now that I think about it.
And also, hypnotherapy, I think, has a lot of potential for some pretty disastrous consequences. I mean, I think that like the idea that a person could supplant a false memory and make you think you lived an experience you didn't live could potentially be problematic. I think
for you and other people.
There's also the idea. I mean, what happens if you remember some sort of repressed, horrible event, and now instead of it being in the deep part of your subconscious where you're not actively aware of it, it's now something that's on the top of your mind that you can't stop thinking about. I mean, I think that there are some massive problems that could happen, and it really is problematic.
That sounds like a psychological nightmare that's just forever.
Yes. But I think the goals overall for both are actually kind of similar. They're more similar than a lot of people might imagine. I think at the end of the day, they're both taking things that are idealistically in the subconscious and putting them to the forefront so you're aware of them. But I think that like the duration and the overall introspectiveness of it is probably varies dramatically and probably is on 2 different extremes.
Well, at least there's some similarities if they're both based on the premise of hypnotic suggestion, at least. It'd be kind of weird if they were completely 100% different.
Yeah.
Ugh. Talk about thinking it's one thing, but it's not. God, that'd be annoying. Anyway, let's see. I think that's the end of this section, so I'm going to check out the comments real quick. Say hi to anybody who's new.
Okay.
Good to see you tonight, this far into the evening. It's been a long week, goodness. Alright, let's see. No new comments as of right now. It's a Wednesday episode.
Yeah, it's a Wednesday episode.
It's the middle of the week. It's the middle of a very hot week.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people's brains are fried at this point. I am included in this particular way.
Hard, same. Gosh, I don't want to do anything. Just gotta power through.
Yeah, we'll get through it.
Boom. Alright, so there's not gonna be any comments so far. Thank you for everybody who's watching so far, and let's keep going, shall we?
Yeah.
Alright, so hypnotherapy as it is today. We covered a bit about how hypnotherapy works, not a lot because it's kind of complicated and we don't have the time to get into all that. So what do you consider some of the positives and negatives of using hypnotherapy? I'm not even going to add to that. Just like, what do you consider some of the positives and negatives?
Well, I think one of the positives is that it allows people to have a treatment option. It's a kind of support network or system that allows them to seek treatment when they may otherwise not be open to treatment or may not have treatment available to them. It definitely opens the door, and so I think that it is definitely a helpful thing. One of the big negatives that I think is probably not as well stated as it probably should be in today is the fact that science still doesn't really understand hypnosis all that well. There is a lot of things that we've done, and we have not really tackled why everything works the way it does. We've had some ideas, and we have some models, and those particular things kind of help when it comes to creating a path by which some people can conduct research. But I think for the most part, there's a lot we don't know, and because of that, there's probably the opportunity for a lot of unintentional harm. When you don't know something and you try to fix it, a lot of problems can occur. So yeah, I would say those are what I would say is positive and negatives for today.
Yeah, fair. For one, can't exactly fix something when you don't know how it broke in the beginning, and two, you don't want to try and fix something because you might break it further.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, trying to fix something that's broken and put random things together and be like, I hope it works, is probably a terrible idea.
Gosh, that sounds like a disaster, especially since this is somebody's mind we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Their mind, which leads to, their health, their livelihood. Okay, I'm gonna stop because that's making me upset here. It's just like, one thing goes wrong, you're absolutely screwed. God, that's a terrible thought.
It is.
But it's reality, unfortunately.
Reality for some.
Reality for some.
I hope it's not a lot.
Hopefully not a lot. Pray for that. Anyway. So because of the fact that it's pretty misunderstood, and not even fully understood, really, when people do decide to use hypnotherapy as a method of treatment, what should they be aware of, since we don't fully understand, 100% how it works?
I would say that be aware of the fact that there's a lot of pseudoscience surrounding the subject of hypnosis and hypnotherapy. Understand that not all practices are created equally. Understand that there are states in the United States, let's assume that most of our audience is in the United States, that recognize like hypnosis as a therapy and require licensing. And there are states, many states, that do not require licensing of any kind to conduct hypnotherapy. And that creates a big problem, especially since it's not uniformly recognized. And because it's not uniformly recognized, there are no practical models by which you can judge results and get expectations. You just have to kind of hope for the best. And I think that's dangerous.
I don't know what I feel about the thought of having a therapist who isn't licensed.
Yeah, I would say that's probably bad. I mean, I wouldn't want to trust someone with deep, dark secrets who isn't, licensed or taken some sort of oath to protect me.
Like, I'm kind of concerned for that. Like, how do we know they're really actually good at what they're doing, Like, you've mentioned before, we've talked about it before, like, even with surgeries, some surgeries fail and whatnot. But you know for a fact that because they're licensed, they did everything they could.
Well, you hope that's the case.
You would hope that's the case.
No
There's some people
system
that
is
it's just
perfect.
like, hey. There's some practices that are, like, not good practices.
Yeah.
But, like, if you're going for somebody who's unlicensed, that, like, that kind of skyrockets up to the top here, for me at least. Don't know how it is for other people, but I'd be terrified out of my mind.
Yeah.
Especially if something goes wrong, like, besides them, who do you blame?
I mean, like, it's not even who you blame, it's like, who do you sue at this point?
It's like, do you sue them? But they got no license. That's like, come on.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, you better hope that they have insurance or something, otherwise you're just kind of screwed.
It's like, what are you supposed to do if something goes wrong? They're not like, it's just a cluster.
Yeah.
Anyway, so hopefully whoever decides to use hypnotherapy as a form of treatment has done their research to understand the potential consequences of actually doing it, especially for their particular state. Gosh, I wouldn't want to accidentally make someone worse than when they came in. That's kind of the opposite of what I want.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the opposite. There's no, I mean, I don't think anyone goes, yeah, this person comes in for help. Oh, I'm going to make them worse. That seems like a good idea. I don't think anyone goes into it like that, but I think that there's a lot of other problems that creates that we're probably not discussing.
Yeah. I'd love to hear about any events that the audience has probably gone through if they've tried hypnotherapy before. I'm kind of curious. But that's another thing. That's another time. So, what do you think could be improved about the entire notion of hypnotherapy, since for quite a number of people it's pseudoscience rather than an actual treatment method, as we've discussed?
I would think more quantitative research needs to be conducted. Something that looks at the actual variables that are at play when it comes to discussing different elements that create the necessity for hypnotherapy in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Get an understanding of why individuals, function differently and need treatment differently, and get an idea behind why that's the case, so that way more effective treatment can be done. And I think creating an overall more concise treatment plan for individuals, letting them know, hey, this is what we're going to do, this is the expected outcome that we're hoping to have, and this is when it's going to end. Rather than having maybe it's going to work, maybe it won't, let's find out, and then here's a start date, and then we'll tell you when the end date is. It's like, that's not a good way to conduct stuff,
Gosh, I hate going in blind.
Yeah, I think being a little more transparent probably would go a long way at making sure that hypnotherapy, not only was it recognized more seriously, but it was actually able to be taken advantage of by people who actually could benefit from such treatment.
Mm-hmm. Would rather go in knowing what's going on, even if it might fail, rather than going in blind and hoping for the best only to be severely disappointed later.
Yeah.
Anyway. So before we get into our conclusions about this entire thing, we do have a comment in the section. It is by host. Piecing together parts can yield good and bad. In the process, we might learn more. Gotta keep an open mind and be prepared for the potential consequences. Yeah, that's... yeah.
The thing I have, that's an interesting statement. But I think that there's a lot of people who have misconceptions about what hypnotherapy actually is, and so while you might want to hope for the best, I don't think those people are prepared for the consequences or even understand what the consequences could be. And so, to me, it's like that's a bit of a problem.
Yeah, especially since I can see where that thought's coming from, because the consequences can range from something minor and subtle to something absolutely disastrous, like what you were mentioning before with the implanting false memories. Some of those can be dealt with, but other times they will absolutely destroy a person.
Yeah, I mean, there's a story of a person, I think, that went to go see somebody for I think it was hypnotherapy. They were trying to discover repressed memories about an alien abduction, and the therapist is accused of planting false memories in the mind of their particular client, which is horrible in and of itself, but also creates other problems that I think that were unintended consequences of the particular approach. So
they think that's real now, so they're gonna talk about it, and for some people they can absolutely be considered crazy.
They could.
Which, depending on who they're around, could absolutely again destroy their life.
They could.
Anyway, so we've covered a lot of information, which means bum-ba-da-dum, concluding statements. I just cracked so many bones. Alright, so time for the conclusion, everybody. Based on what we've discussed so far, how reasonable is it to assume that hypnosis and hypnotherapy are a factual, helpful form of treatment?
Honestly, I think that it's helpful there's a support system, but I think that's about it. I don't really think there's any sort of science that significantly shows hypnotherapy as being 100% factual and showing enough evidence to support treatment. The best case scenario showed a 70% treatment plan of the number of people that they asked. The research also was conducted a long time ago, and I don't think those particular individuals account for all the variables that exist in society today, and I would expect the ratio of people who successfully receive treatment to be far lower than 70%.
Mm-hmm.
And with that particular type of treatment potential plan, I would think that it's incredibly unlikely that it's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just dangerous.
As host mentions, it's a lot easier to mess someone up since you can take gaslighting or leading questions to be just two of the many examples.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that.
Yeah.
That's definitely a good statement, host.
Like, how much you've mentioned, like, looking more quantitative research, looking into all the variables.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you had to give a rough estimate, like, how much research would you say, how much concrete research would have to be conducted to make it, like, potentially, like, an actual form of treatment, do you think? If it's at all possible?
Well, I mean, I don't think there's some magic number, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, of things. What I would say is that the amount of data out there that supports it is just almost non-existent. Like, one of the things that's important to understand when it comes to psychology is that in order for something to be taken seriously, it either has to have been taken seriously for such a long period of time that it's just accepted, or it's something that you can test and is credible every 5 to 10 years.
Mm.
The last serious study that was conducted that looked at hypnotism was conducted in 2013. And its results essentially said that it was not able to show conclusive evidence to support any benefit. So 8 years ago, it was the last one, and they said that there was no known benefit in the only study that I saw. Now, there are studies that are done all the time, but scientific studies that actually specifically look at this stuff as the only thing they're studying, it's like, it is challenging, to say the least, to find credible sources.
Mm-hmm. Fair.
And I don't think enough of them are being done. And so I would say that, like, one of the easiest ways of doing this is just probably having a repeatable, large, body of evidence that can be used as a multitude of tests and other sorts of, data collection, like, types of things to potentially support it. And then from there, I would say just having an actual large number of people who can testify, hey, this worked and this helped and this is why. I think would be things that I would look at and be like, this is evidence of this works. But I can find hundreds of things that are contrary to hypnotic suggestion as effective forms of treatment, and yet I can only find a dozen, maybe less than a dozen, maybe half a dozen papers that are credible that support it. And when you have that kind of discrepancy in the amount of people who are for it and who are against it, it shows that there's a huge disconnect in the amount of knowledge we have. So regardless of if it works or not, there's just simply not enough research being conducted that proves it definitively. And for me, that's that's the ground we would have to cross for it to change my mind.
Mm-hmm. So, on this particular point, there's a comment on an earlier point, which was based on the whole, it's a whole lot easier to mess somebody up. This one's from Kyle, saying it's easier to spread misery than it is to spread joy, which...
I disagree. I disagree. It's all about temperament. It depends on who's doing the spreading, right?
Yeah.
Martin Luther King was an inspirational person to speak to, right? He's known for his speeches and the things he fought for, right?
Okay.
There were hundreds of people who also spoke about the same problems Dr. King spoke about, and yet we don't remember them. Why? Because it's the influential individual, the powerful speaker, the one who's gifted with the tongue that we remember. Those are the people that we listen to. So it's not the content, it's the person who spreads the message. And just as many people who are powerful, who are influential, who are able to spread a joyous message, there are equal numbers of people who spread misery. And I think that's not easier. I think it's just more common because we live in a cynical world.
Oh yeah, we do. Like, that's why I can see where Kyle's comment comes from, because it is it. People can get upset by a lot of things. Like, people will, from what I've noticed in my own experience, like, it's a lot easier to get upset at some things rather than feeling happy. Like, the amount of things that make people upset is quite a large number compared to what can make somebody happy. Probably because the whole upset covers a lot more than just like anger, sadness, disappointment, da 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 da. While joy is like a couple of emotions compared to the plethora of negative emotions, so that's why I can see why it's easier to quote spread misery than it is to spread joy.
I mean, perhaps. I mean, that's a perspective. I'm not going to say that,
Yeah, exactly,
that he's necessarily wrong or you're wrong. I would just say that to me personally, I think that like I think that it's easy to spread both. I don't think that it's necessarily one or the other. I think it's all down to the person who speaks it and then down to the person who listens to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, like, you know, it's contingent upon the loudest voice.
Mm. Unfortunately, a lot of the loud ones are more negative. But on this point about the research done into hypnotherapy and whatnot, Kyle says there's an interesting problem about the research side, because the kind of people who would do research on hypnotherapy either believe both would result in biased research. Yeah.
Well, biased research is what I said. It's research bias is yeah, 100%. The problem, I think, is not even that at all. I think it's the funding to conduct such studies in the first place.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, think about it like this, right? Like, okay, let's say the researcher's biased, right?
Okay.
Then yeah, maybe the thing they put out is bias, all right? But the data they collect and the data they present is going to have some inherent value.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's 100 to 1 when it comes to the current like conclusions that discuss hypnosis. You will find 100 papers saying it's not real, it's not good, it's not factual, it's subjective, you know, blah 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 blah, and you'll find a paper that says it works. And so it's like when you have that kind of detriment, you know, that kind of disconnect, it's like there is an inherent problem going on. And that's why I said what I said before about needing there to be more research for it to change my perspective, because the research I've seen now is it points fingers at oddities and anomalies in data saying that these are the norm, and like it's clearly not the case. And then the scientists that are being reasonable are like, yeah, those are outliers, but the norm says it's this, which says it doesn't work. And so, like, I'm at the point where it's like, bring me the evidence that suggests that this is a thing and this is an effective form of treatment. Otherwise, I don't want to hear about it. Like, that's my take on it. That's very, like, in your face, but, like, that's just the way it is. I mean...
No, yeah, definitely in your face about it.
There was one thing I wanted to say about when it came to something we didn't get a chance to cover.
Sure.
That had to do when it came to hypnotherapy and the treatment of particularly women who undergo pregnancy.
Okay.
And we kind of weren't able to get to it for whatever reason. And the thing that I wanted to discuss about that was that hypnotherapy, when it comes to the support system, which I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier in the episode,
mm-hmm.
was there to try and like make the woman feel more confident, more empowered, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those same things that the hypnotherapist is doing is something that any supportive therapist also do during a traumatic event. And so to me, there's no difference in the form of treatment based upon whether it be a hypnotherapist being supportive, or a normal therapist being supportive, or a doula being supportive, or a midwife being supportive. They're just going through a traumatic event that they need support and they need someone. So I don't think hypnotherapy being like, hey, this works for women who are trying to give birth, and that's the hallmark of, oh, hey, a hypnotherapist is successful because of this, is the benchmark by which we go, hey, this is how all these things should be looked at. It's like, no, they're just being supported in a time of need. And it's not the hypnotherapist, you know, it's hypnotherapy that's providing the comfort. It's the presence of a person who is being compassionate and helping be supportive. That I think is the thing. So I just wanted to mention that before we conclude this, because like I know for a fact that if somebody was ever reading these episodes in the future, they'd go, but, you know, and I'm just like, no, let's nip that in the butt now.
All right. So, I think that's all we wanted to cover for this live stream, at least.
That's right. And on Saturday we'll be having a fun episode. We'll have several guests discussing creepiness, so hopefully you guys stay tuned for that. And on Sunday we're going to be doing a live stream, I think in the evening time. Check Twitter and Instagram. We will be posting there when we're going to be doing it. Will TikTok be up yet, or is that later?
It's probably going to go up the same day, to be honest.
Okay, so all three of these things, take the thing you want. We're going to be doing it. We're going to be doing some stuff there. You'll see the game we're going to be doing. You'll see the time it's going to be going. And we hope to see you there.
Okay. And with that, thank you everyone for joining our episode tonight. I appreciate all of you, and I believe so does Justin.
Of course I do. You guys are all wonderful and beautiful people. And we'll see you all in the next one. Later.
Yep.